is if I. All right.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the CCA living room. Our Lost Classics session number 3 with the esteemed Council of Lost Classics, world famous panel of film lovers. Mara Fortes joining us from Mexico City, Joan Tewksbury, and Paul Barnes right from Santa Fe. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thanks to Mara for picking out all of these quotes from the book Notes on Cinematography by Robert Bresson, the director of the film we're going to discuss tonight. I think it's a book that all of us have in our DNA, all of us film lovers have in our DNA. I think I might have gone a little too fast with some of those quotes, so I am going to post all of those into chat, but you all should go out and find a copy of Notes on Cinematography on eBay or Amazon. It's probably still in print too. We're going to talk about A Man Escaped tonight. If you love what we're doing here at CCA with the Living Room, I would love for you to consider supporting us. We're making these programs free. We do incur costs for each of these programs. If you'd like to chip in and make sure this program stays strong, I'm going to post this offer here. You can see it now in your sidebar. You can click on the Donate Now. It'll pop up in a separate window. You don't have to deal with it until after the program, and you can chip in and make sure the Living Room stays strong. So our order of operations tonight is we're going to let these three have at it again. It's so much fun. It's a small miracle that this all came together the way it did. I just thought of three film lovers who I thought would, have interesting things to add about a specific movie, and it turns out that I think they're all siblings from different lifetimes, and we're watching Shadows on the Wall in some past civilization and talking about them and dissecting them together until late hours in the night. I just want to say, Robert Bresson and this film in particular were hugely influential for me. I was an aspiring filmmaker when I stumbled into a retrospective of Bresson's that was put on by the Austin Film Society. I think it was 1991. And I went to the first one, and then I went to all of them. And he's perhaps the most purely spiritual of all the major filmmakers. And I guess we'll talk about that together today. If you have questions, thoughts, concerns, suggestions for other movies for the Lost Classics team, put them into chat and we will get to them. So I'm going to start. Let's just go into our Foursquare here. And I'm not sure who's starting because these guys have their own kind of flow. So I'm going to turn it over to y'all, and you can take it from here.
Okay. Should I start, guys, since I chose this film?
Sure.
Yes, sir.
All right, folks. Welcome to tonight's film program. I'm really, really happy to have to be presenting A Man Escaped. It's one of my all-time favorite films and was very, very influential on me as a young filmmaker. And this is my copy of Notes on Cinematography by Robert Bresson that I purchased in 1977. He became a very beloved film master in my film education. I really, really adore this man. And I also think that of all the great filmmakers, he has one of the most unique visionary styles that any filmmaker has ever created in the history of cinema. And happy to show the film again, only because I feel like he's been forgotten to some degree. He's not, I don't think, on the tip of people's tongues when they begin to talk about great films. And so the opportunity to show this again to everybody is a great joy of mine. I also think that, Bresson is often criticized as being slow and esoteric and kind of too formal. He chooses non-professionals to be in his films as opposed to actors, so all of the emotions are tamped down. But that's all a part of his deliberate style. What he has developed is a spare, austere, minimalist style. It's almost all close-ups of hands, faces, eyes, objects, and actions. And the story is conveyed almost totally through images and sound. When Bresson developed this style, he really shook up the established conventions of cinema at the time in the early 1950s. When he developed this, these films just looked so different, so unusual from what was being produced at the time. And over the course of his career, he developed that style in each and every subsequent film. But he was a true innovator, and I think a true rebel of cinema in that regard. The film itself, just to give you a little bit of background, the film is based on a narrative that was written by a soldier, a French resistance fighter named André de Vigny, who was imprisoned in 1943. And the narrative he wrote is about his escape. And basically the film that Bresson has made, although the name is changed, is de Vigny's story. The script that Bresson developed is scrupulous to the narrative that de Vigny wrote, and de Vigny was actually hired by Bresson to be a consultant on set for the entire shooting period of the film. Bresson wanted to take this real story and put it on screen in a sort of semi-documentary style in a way. The film opens with a title card that says, "The following is a true story. I present it as it happened without adornment." And without adornment is certainly the key phrase there. It also so happens that Bresson himself was imprisoned for 9 months in the period of 1940-1941. And so one reason why Bresson changed the name from de Vigny, from André to Fontaine, is because he did incorporate some of his own experiences into the screenplay. And so the story itself is very dear to Bresson, very close to his heart in that regard. And he deeply admired de Vigny for the strength he showed in carrying out this pretty amazing escape. One of the notes that you saw on the slide early on is the most important thing about being in prison is the door. How true that is it not? You know, there are really very striking elements to the film that I think many of you may have picked up on. First of all, the black and white cinematography, the compositions are so gorgeous, but very, very simple and very, very minimal in the way in which it's done. The sound effects, you might notice, are very spare, and oftentimes they're heightened. They seem a little bit extra loud, a little bit slightly unreal. So they're mimicking reality, but they also have an element of abstraction to them. And if you noticed in watching the film, you get an awful lot of information from the sound. You know when a guard is approaching by the footsteps. You know when trains are passing by the sounds of the trains. You get a sense of the city of Lyon, where the prison is located by the sounds coming in from the street, the trolley cars, the voices of the villagers, the sounds of children playing. Although we never see any of those things visually, it's all done through sound. And again, it was a main component of Bresson's style to do that. The other thing that Bresson took a big risk with in this film, and it was common with documentaries, but not with features at the time, is voiceover. He loved voiceover because of the ability to get into the character's head and reflect on what you saw happen and then get the character's reflection on it, or vice versa, what the character was thinking that then becomes an action that he carries out. And all of the voiceover in the film are direct quotations from de Vigny's narrative, and all of them are read by the performer playing Fontaine. Again, it was just a very unusual and striking thing at the time to have such extensive voiceover in the film. The film itself also was filmed at the prison that André de Vigny was in. It's the Montluc prison that was located in Lyon, and it was still preserved. It was currently a fort, an army fort at the time that Bresson did the film. He got permission to film there. A great deal of the film was filmed on location at the prison, and then Bresson and his production team went ahead and scrupulously recreated the two cells that Fontaine is imprisoned in a production studio to give him the ability to be able to film it exactly as he wanted. So it's a combination of those locations. And the other thing you might notice is that the locations themselves are very minimal in terms of quantity. It's you're stuck in the prison with Fontaine. It's those two cells, it's the washroom, it's the corridor, it's the stairway, it's the courtyard. And other than that, we have no other sense of the town of Lyon or the people except for the sounds that we hear from coming up from outside. So there's definitely a very focused approach to making the film. The other thing I did mention, again, it's a highlight of Bresson's films and of the stylistic approach he takes, and we can talk about this more a little bit later. But the person he hired to portray Fontaine is not a professional actor. His name is Francois Leterrier, and he was a philosophy student at the University of Paris, who then was in the army for 2 years in Morocco, came back to Paris because when he was at the university, he joined the University Film Club and became interested in film and wanted to become a scriptwriter. And so when he came back to Paris, he started hanging out with a group of film folks. And someone mentioned to him that Bresson was making this film and looking for someone to portray Fontaine. And even though Leterrier wasn't interested in acting, he thought, well, why not give it a shot? I'll just try out and see what happens. And Bresson had arrived at a point in his career where he hated working with actors because they came with so much baggage and training that he really hated. And so when he met Francois Leterrier, he was very struck by his posture, by the way he moved, by his face, especially his expressive eyes. He also was very impressed with the kind of military discipline that he seemed to have gained from his experience in the army. And because he was going to be portraying Fontaine, who was a lieutenant in the French army, who then became a member of the resistance, he thought that military discipline and training that Leterrier had would also be appropriate. Essentially, he was casting a non-actor for their being, for the kind of interior qualities that they had, and for the naturalness of the way in which they moved and behaved. And I think he also found Leterrier's eyes to be especially expressive. There seemed to be a real soul that you could feel within that person that he wanted to capture on film in portraying Fontaine. So those are all highlights and parts of what I think makes Bresson so unique. The other thing about this film is that it's probably his most accessible. I think it's very easy for an audience to get into the narrative of this film because it's an escape story. It's kind of a common genre across film cultures around the world. I think every country has an escape drama of some sort that really captivates people. And because this film was made in 1955, released in 1956, it was very close to World War II. And of course, the French revered their resistance fighters for the courage that they showed during the Nazi occupation in World War II. And so when the film did come out, it was one of Bresson's few successes. Most of his films were rarely seen and largely ignored by the public, even though they were revered by many of the film critics at the time. So that's kind of a background of what why I chose the film. Joan or Mara, do either one of you want to comment on?
Where's Mara?
Oh, has Mara disappeared? Oh, she's coming back, I think.
Coming back. Mara, are you here?
I'm here. Sorry, I got kicked out.
Oh, okay.
There you are.
There you are. I'm sorry. So you missed some of my spiel.
That's okay. I'm back. I think this webinar is very Bressonian because it doesn't let you overwhelm the eye and the ear at the same time. So
there you go.
So I think I listened to most of what you said about Bresson. So is it my turn to speak?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So actually, like I I what's really interesting to me is that we actually don't know that much about who Bresson was. There's
Right.
relatively few information, and he lived in the Ile Saint Louis in Paris most of his life. So I think it's really it's really fitting that he lived in an island and he himself was this island figure. But I guess I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about the specifics of what's considered his style. And, he's been, as you said, hugely influential and influential to a wide range of filmmakers, from like Tarkovsky to Haneke, the Safdie brothers. So just the sheer range of the filmmakers that he's influenced
Yes.
made me think that his style is also very different from what we think about an auteur style, in the sense that it's not, I'm going to stamp my personality on this film, but almost the opposite. It's all about removing any kind of prefabricated meaning. And he sort of came up with this philosophy, as you said, and it was, in his mind, he opposed cinema to cinematography. And cinema was sort of the art form that was contaminated by other art forms, by theater, by literature, anything that kind of was already pre-saturated with some kind of meaning was cinema. And cinematography, which is what he tried to accomplish in his work, was, I think one of the quotes that we had in the slideshow is to sort of think that the end of the film is the screen. So the end of what you're creating is this white blank rectangle. And so I think every element that goes in there has to have that kind of room for inscription. It cannot be pre-filled with any sort of artificial emotion or anything that saturates, that is superfluous to that creation. And so the way I see it is, if you think about that screen or that white rectangle in the aspect of the actors, he, as you said, I think except for one film, the one he did with Jean Cocteau, he used mostly non-actors. And, there's these stories that he would make actors walk up and down the stairs 100 times, repeat lines of dialogues, to kind of like purify them from any intention or any sort of artificial emotion, any interpretation from the actor themselves. And I think, in a way, that's also thinking of who you put on screen as a screen in themselves. So he called them models, but for me, they're part of this idea of put a face that is also a screen. And I think it was extreme to the point that even for the film with the donkey, Oazar Baltasar, he actually requested that the donkey not be a donkey trained for the camera. So it had to be an untrained donkey. So it was like, everything. He was very faithful to this rigorous philosophy. And I think you mentioned all these shots of hands. And so he had this idea that 80% of our activities are automatic, or our gestures are automatic. And the most automatized aspects of our bodies are our hands. So I think that's why he also loved showing hands on screen and really developing the expressiveness of hands. Even in this film, I feel like you remember the eyes of the actor, but you also remember more shots of hands than you do of faces or bodies. And I think the other thing that was really important to him is that meaning comes from relations, right? So you never want to have an unintentional or superfluous redundance between sound and image, but they have to work together. And I think he also, one of the quotes in the slideshow said, always show the effect before the cause. And he actually has this beautiful anecdote of him walking down the street and seeing this man pass him by with a really intense look in his eyes. And, he uses it as an example and says, I looked to where he was gazing and then realized he was gazing at a woman and a young kid. And he says, if I had seen the woman and the young kid first, I wouldn't have noticed the look on his eyes. But because I saw the look on his eyes, then I looked at what he was seeing. And I think that's kind of like how he structures the films. And this one, you know, it's if you missed the title, which tells you what happens in the film, you have the voiceover, which basically tells you, you know, this is not a question of whether or not this man is going to escape. He has already escaped. And that like totally centers your attention on how is he going to escape. And so I think a lot of, you know, what's contained in notes on the cinematograph is kind of a code of how to direct the attention of the viewer as well. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the style, and I guess just thinking, kind of orienting towards the specifics of this film.
Right, exactly.
It's interesting to me that he was a painter.
Yes.
And he was a painter first. And it's also interesting to me as a filmmaker that all of the major action or the major events are often off screen.
Mm-hmm.
And what you are left with are spaces. The first event is when your main character is taken out of the car, escapes from the car, and there is a ruckus outside and he's brought back. But you, the viewer, are left sitting in the car not knowing what's going to happen. So the tension starts there. You never quite, even though you know what the end of the film is going to be, so there's a safety in that. But you are never quite certain of where you are because the space leaves you room for your imagination to take over and wonder, oh my God, what's going to happen to this poor soul? And also in the way the sets were structured, once you get inside of the prison and before you get into the making, the literally making of the movie and the event of escaping, there are doors within doors so that they create shadows where shadows don't really exist. But in all of those spaces, there is tension. So as much as you know about the film, you don't know about what is happening inside of the characters. So your body starts to take in a kind of terror in a way that's quiet. And the beauty of not using actors is because they come with no baggage. And Bresson reminds me of choreographers that I have worked with who have said, just move your eyeballs to the left. With no reason, just move your eyeballs to the left on the count of 4. Now back on the count of 8. And you're going, oy vey. But with a non-actor to argue with you about motivation or intention or wanting to ask any of those questions, he could achieve almost the same way that a painter chooses color to put on the screen the exactitude of what he wanted at that moment. So a non-actor will offer no resistance. They're just delighted to be there, and they'll sort of do anything you ask them to do. And in my experience with Altman, always if we needed a barber, or if you needed a dentist or a doctor, you hired a doctor, you hired a dentist, and you hired a barber to cut the hair in the movie, so that you would have the actual event going on, nothing that was fake. But for me, in terms of people making, young filmmakers making films today, because you can use an iPhone, the simplicity of storytelling in his style or in his absolute purpose in the story that he is telling can be achieved very cheaply today with young filmmakers, so that they don't have to feel that they need a lot of the extras. And so he is a great example of something to follow, and how he creates story they're like small gems. They really are.
Yes. I mean, it's interesting to go back to, I was reading an interview with Francois Leterrier, and he talked about working with Bresson. And of course, he was with Bresson all the way because this was his entree into the film world. So this was his first major job, and he thought, I'm just going to watch this man, listen to this man, do anything he wants me to do. So he was a very willing victim of his rigorous directorial instructions.
Victim is a good word.
but well, it was in a way, because also Bresson was notorious for shooting, 30, 35, 40 takes of one shot until he felt he got exactly what it was that he wanted out of a gesture or a movement or an eye glance or whatever. And Leterrier said, Bresson never gave me a direction in terms of emotion or feeling. He'd say, move here to there, look from here to there. And we'd do it over and over until it was exactly how he wanted it. But you can see that, there's a precision in the work that is also very unique. I mean, he's not at all what you would call a loosey-goosey director. He wants, in fact, one of his early notes was master precision, be a precision instrument myself. He controlled absolutely every aspect of every shot, everything that was done on the set. The lighting, the actors' movements, the set direction, the design, all of it. He controlled it, from to the utmost. Another one of his early notes was, the point is not to direct someone, but to direct myself. It was, what do I need to do to get what the story means to me onto the screen and have that translate to the audience in exactly the emotional way in which I want it to do. In talking about the models and using models, non-professionals, another note says, no actors, no directing of actors, no parts, no learning of parts, no staging, but the use of working models taken from life, being, in capital letters, models instead of seeming actors. Another interesting thing that I'd like to point out too, in terms of this precision, directors always have their own kind of rules and set of rules and restrictions that they give themselves in terms of focusing in on what they are trying to do. And one interesting thing, again, I discovered in researching the film from one of his cinematographers, Pierre Lehome, who was the cinematographer on Four Nights of a Dreamer. But to quote his interview, he says, Bresson used only one focal length lens, a 50 millimeter. It comes the closest to human eyesight. This restriction gave Bresson ideas for his direction. It emphasized gestures of the face. If you can't fit the gesture and the face in the same frame, then you have to choose or plan a camera move. For Bresson, this restriction gives you a freedom you don't have when you are free to use all the other possibilities. And again, it's that austerity, that sparing, that stripping down, that's such a characteristic of his work, I think, that is exemplified by that one crazy rule of only using one focal length lens through the entire shooting. But you look at this film in its glorious black and white, which I think is magnificently photographed by Léonce-Henri Burel, one of the great French cinematographers ever. And it's just extraordinary, the work that they did together, even with that restriction of a 50 millimeter focal length lens. And I'm sure Burel must have, rebelled against that initially, but then, like any good craftsman, you're giving a rule to follow, and it doesn't necessarily have to become a restriction, but it can become a way to free you into a new kind of creativity. In some ways, it forced Burel to get into Bresson's head in terms of what he was seeing and how he wanted to see it. And especially if that lens is the closest to human eyesight, which is probably what appealed to Bresson, I think.
I think also the manner that you're speaking of drives the viewer to the interior of the character that you're observing.
Exactly.
So you become the character that you are in observation, but pretty soon you are the character. You are imprisoned in that space. You are the one who is trying to figure out how to get the board loosened or the springs not making a sound. So that there is something in the frame that pulls you and keeps pulling you. That is part of the tension of keeping you in the story, to the point where there are times when you think you'll just die if the slightest thing is out of order, that he will be discovered.
Yes, exactly.
And I think, just adding to what you say, Joan, there's also this way in which it, shows the codes that the prisoners share, but, especially sound-wise. And then, it starts making you complicit in those codes, so that you too know
Yes.
that, when the train whistles, is a chance for action, or when, the faucets are running, that's when the prisoners can communicate, because the sound will camouflage their voices.
Yeah.
So it's like this, it makes you part of the prison world, even if, there's a screen/door between you and them, but.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Guys, should we look at one little clip just to take another look at a section, given what we've been talking about, and just kind of let the audience recall a piece of the film? Jason, maybe you could play clip number 1.
Avez-vous une épingle? Une épingle? Attendez. Il se dirigea vers le bâtiment occupé par les femmes.
Do you hear the trolley bells and the children laughing in the background to give a sense of the town?
Ceux de leur part. Sur le papier, tracé d'une main féminine, le mot courage. Il y avait aussi l'épingle.
I love.
Mon voisin m'avait enseigné la méthode, mais je ne réussis pas tout d'abord, et d'ailleurs je n'y croyais guère.
Oops. Is the video still playing, or did it stop? Is the video frozen? Hello? Jason, are you there?
I am. I think it was playing. It was playing on our end, but we can let the audience know if they saw it or not.
Is it? Did it finish?
I think so. It got hung up there for a second. So.
Oh,
it's okay. Well, sorry about that, guys. Yeah, it froze, which it can do sometimes.
Okay. But again, just the safety pin is, I think, a wonderful little detail in the film. Um, the film begins and Fontaine is stuck in a cell on the lower floor, which allows him to communicate with the men who are walking in the courtyard. And communication develops between them. And the men are able to smuggle the string that allows Fontaine to hoist down his handkerchief to load things into. And that's a way that Fontaine can communicate with the outside world. And the three men in the courtyard are also show how the villagers are all a part of the resistance in a way, that they're very willing to help him with what he needs. He gets a note out to tell his fellow resistance fighters that when he was captured, the Nazis captured his radio transmitter and probably have discovered the code they were using for communications. So he's able to do that through these three brave men. And they continue to do things for him. And he asks for a safety pin, and you wonder why. What's so wonderful is that when the package comes back, it's wrapped in that beautiful little flyer, but it has a razor blade, it has some sugar cubes, it has what looks like a biscuit and a piece of chocolate. So there's a generosity on the part of the women towards the prisoner, which is also very affecting to me. And then on the flyer, they wrote the word courage, which again it's a wonderful little detail, but this is a time when Fontaine was really in great fear and doubt for his own life. And so just that one little message was a wonderful thing. And then again, Mara mentioned it earlier, but the things the prisoners learn how to communicate, the tapping on the walls, and I'm sure it was a kind of Morse code that they were using. And the prisoner next door told Fontaine how he could get out of the handcuffs, which were killing him. And that's why he asked for the safety pin. And the instructions he had written on the wall and then followed them to free up his hands. I mean, it's a really lovely, small, and the film is filled with these tiny, small details that are so touching and so telling. And if you notice too, there's one thing, watching François Leterrier, you can see how there's not a lot going on in his face, but his eyes seem so expressive and waiting and watching. And what the cinematographer, Léonce Henri Burel, always did so beautifully was to put this eye light right into the pupil of his eyes, so that as an audience, you're always drawn into those eyes, because that whatever he used as an eye light is so damn bright, it just stands out like, in almost every single shot in a really expressive way, which is quite striking, I think. But it's the film is built on a lot of small, swift scenes, a lot of fade outs and fade ins. They're very succinct. It has a great momentum in that sense, because it kind of an accumulation of little moments that carries you through the entire film. It's beautifully paced in that regard. But the biggest theme that's in the film is that the film is about faith. It's about Fontaine's ability to maintain his faith in believing that he can escape, to maintain his faith in his fellow prisoners that they will help him, especially when he doubts their abilities or doubts their intentions in many ways. It's also a film about his will and determination and immense ingenious creativity in trying to figure out how he can get out of this place with almost nothing on hand. I mentioned faith in a kind of a secular way. But one thing to remember about Bresson was that he was an ardent Catholic, and he had a deep faith in God. And I think that it's not played up a lot in the film, but there is a deep spiritual aspect, I think, in this theme of faith in the film. for example, in a 1973 interview, Bresson said, "There is a feeling that I have that God is everywhere. And the more I live, the more I see that in nature, in the country. When I see a tree, I know that God exists. I try to convey the idea we have a soul and that soul is in contact with God. That's the first thing I want to get in my films." And Bresson's original title for A Man Escapes was a variation on a French phrase, "God helps those that help themselves." Bresson said, "I would like to show this miracle, an invisible hand over the prison, directing what happens and causing such and such a thing to succeed for one and not for another. The film is a mystery. The spirit breathes where it will." And miracles play a part throughout the film, both big and small. The biggest miracle, of course, is Fontaine and Jost's escape. And the small miracles are these little details: the arrival of the safety pin, the door's structure with two kinds of wood, one that he can pull out, obtaining the first spoon, obtaining the second spoon, the lantern frame that becomes Fontaine's hooks, which is a variation on Christ's water into wine. A lantern frame turning into a hook to help him escape. The package arrival that extends Fontaine's supply of creating rope. All of those little details, those little things that happen are in many ways small miracles that allow the big miracle to happen. But it's also interesting in terms of Bresson's spirituality that he sees that God is able to only to work in collaboration with man. It's Fontaine's faith that he can escape, his will and determination, his ability to overcome doubts, and his ingenious creativity in conjunction with God's miracles, his invisible hand over the prison, that make Fontaine succeed. But in a key scene in the washroom, Fontaine overhears the priest say to another prisoner, "Read and pray, God will save you." But Fontaine responds, "He'll save us if we give him the chance. It would be too easy if God saw to everything." So Fontaine's faith in himself works in conjunction with his faith in God's invisible hand over the prison, and faith in his miracles, like the safety pin. I think that's kind of the bigger overarching spiritual message that I think Bresson was trying to convey in this film, and to convey it in a story that anybody could relate to. But the fact that, Bresson is saying, we can't just depend on God, guys. It's like we have to have this inner faith in our souls to be able to accomplish these miracles that we are setting out for ourselves. And certainly the escape from this prison at Montluc was a major endeavor. It was pretty darn miraculous for sure. But I think it's really a fascinating aspect of the film and a fascinating part of the themes that run through all of Bresson's films.
And I think that, I was thinking about the music that comes up in these, I was trying to figure out what the pattern was, but the music is also a mass.
Yes, it's a mass. Mozart.
And so, I was thinking that's also an element of faith, and where it appears to me, it seems to be, it punctuates the moments where Fontaine either decides to trust a prisoner or is witness to, for example, the Orsini, the prisoner who tries to escape and eventually fails. But it's these moments of connection with the other human beings. So to me, that was like it's faith in solidarity that is punctuated by the music.
Yes, no, dependence about community for sure. I mean, that's shown throughout the film. Absolutely.
But that you have to be responsible. It's what you were saying. It is not just the faith, but you have to be responsible for your own action to jump in and to be brave enough to do that.
Right.
is the accumulation of all these details, so that one detail after the other reinforces your bravery.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost okay, God's there and all of that, but it is the accumulation of events to know that you are brave enough to physically be able to get up high enough to look out the window. That's his first act of bravery, in a way,
Right.
because he has been so diminished physically by a beating.
Yes.
And so once you achieve that, then you can do the next thing and the next thing. And so, as the movie is about a man escaping, it is also about the process of making a movie. As you have these accumulation of details as you go along as a filmmaker, allows you to be brave enough to take the next leap of faith, as it were. And you are constantly being confronted by things that fall apart. But in that, as he watches those things, it's almost like a study in what he decides what not to do in the course of his journey to escape.
Yes.
It's like calibrating what works, what doesn't.
Right.
You know.
Yes, exactly. I know. Mara, have we gotten any questions in the chat?
Let me see. Judy Hansen is saying another theme seems to be the tension between diligence and boldness. Do we agree? If yes,
Yeah.
does that come up in other Bresson films or just this one?
Diligence and boldness.
Sort of what we just were talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I'd have to agree with Judy. I think that is a theme that does run through most of his films in many ways. The diligence to keep pushing forward, oftentimes with a bold action, is something that many of his characters tussle with and deal with in the course of the other narratives that he has presented. It's always, very often, the characters are faced with enormous doubt about themselves, but they rely on, they keep moving forward with a kind of single-minded fierceness, whereby it's almost as if their faith in God in many ways is pushing them forward. And that allows them to take a step and take an action that allows them to pass through one of these areas of doubt that they're facing.
But it's also, he has been trained in the military. So there is a certain kind of rigor.
Yeah.
And I'm not that familiar with all of the rest of Bresson's films, but it feels like in each of his characters, there is a certain kind of educated rigor that allows them to proceed with the boldness, to have enough faith in that the discipline or the rigor will hold you, so that you can, and he fails. And so, but he tries again and again and again.
Yes.
And you get that by having a kind of military discipline or sports, whatever your discipline is. So it's, and it is the discipline of the church. It's the discipline of faith in God.
Yes.
For Catholics, or for any religion.
Yes, true.
And someone mentioned the pickpocket, which is like interesting to consider in relation to A Man Escaped, because it's almost the B-side. It's also someone who's very precise, but that ends up in jail rather than escaping prison. Let's see. Could you describe how Bresson's films help shed a light on the relative manipulative techniques of commercial cinema?
Oh. I don't know that they shed any light on the manipulative aspects of commercial cinema. Bresson was all about getting rid of any aspect of commercial cinema in his films whatsoever. There was a purity he was trying to attain in his choices to wipe out any possible aspects of commercial cinema, whether it's the overuse of music or the use of over-the-top actors or cinematography tricks of flying cameras and over costumes, over designed sets. Bresson found all of that stuff appalling. And in fact, Pierre Lehome, I mentioned earlier, who shot Four Nights of a Dreamer, they became good friends, and they would often just go to a cinema together. Although it became a bit of a chore for Lehome because Bresson hated every single film they went to see practically. And would sit there muttering, "Oh, why did they do that? Oh, what a poor choice. Oh, get rid of that actor." It was just, it became almost an unbearable experience for Lehome to do it, although he also rather enjoyed it. But no, I don't think there's any relation between Bresson and the commercial cinema whatsoever.
No, but I think that what Bresson shows is what you don't have to do to even effect. I mean, if you look at his work, you just go, "Why are you guys doing all that?" I mean, it's certainly a way to realize that less is more.
Yes, less is more for sure.
And he has in his book, he has one quote that's something like, cinema, radio, television are a school of inattention, because you look at television without actually looking, or you hear without listening, I think is the idea. And this is before internet and iPhones. Right. So I think in a way his films are a school of attention to counter the kind of redundancy and just everything that teaches you not to pay full attention to other media.
Yeah, it's true. Well, actually, I also read an interview with the French director Bruno Dumont, who's a huge fan of Bresson's. But he said that one of the things that so struck him was the strangeness of his films. And he said that's often a hallmark of a real pioneer in cinema, when they can introduce an element into cinema that feels strange. And thus it becomes very captivating in a way. So you start to watch Bresson's films, and it doesn't have the hallmarks of any standard film you're used to. Actors are not acting, it's not bathed in music. There's no fancy camera movements. Everything is sort of tamped down. The dialogue is read in a kind of monotone. So there's not a lot of expressiveness in that. But there's something about that strangeness that draws you in. And I think that's part of the power of Bresson's work, that it becomes hypnotic after a while. Many people who first come in to watch a Bresson film, they have a hard time with it. But if you stick with it, you become captivated, and it becomes a hypnotic experience in a certain way. And the emotion that you feel is lacking at the beginning because of these restrictions in performers and line readings and so forth, all of a sudden they begin to accumulate a kind of power over the course of the film. I find them devastatingly emotional, all of them practically. And by the end, I'm just kind of a puddle, because they become so powerful by the restraint with which they're made. So there's something very striking about that. It's like Bertolt Brecht's alienation effect in a way. It's like you push the audience away as a way to draw them in. The strangeness almost makes them think a little bit about what do they do? It makes the audience think more about what's going on. And then once they make a connection, because they have to work a little bit harder, I think it has a stronger payoff in the end. There's something also quite remarkable about that push-pull of that kind of the alienation effect that he's utilizing.
Well, also there is enough space that he leaves room for you to be a participant in it.
Yes.
Rather than shutting you out with sound effect and car crashes and one thing piled on top of the other. You enter his work and you are in the work as much as the actors in a way.
Yes. No, I agree 100%.
There's a comment from an audience member, Brian Deere, who says that this was the first time he saw a man escape, but it reminded him of certain scenes in Papillon by Franklin Schaffner. And just, he says, because in that film, he also made sound a very important part of the story. And every sudden sound, just like the prisoners began a timer ticking for the prisoners, and then in 8 seconds a guard would be appearing or something else would happen.
Oh, Mara, you broke up at the end. I couldn't hear the end of your comment.
Oh, it was just a comment from someone in the audience saying that the film reminded him of Papillon by Franklin Schaffner. Just this idea that the meaning that like a whistle can have in terms of you paying attention to it, but also it becomes like a ticking timer for the story and for the characters.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And Jason asks if we remember the first time we saw a Bresson film.
Okay.
Oh, well, I mean, that's easy for me to answer because the first was A Man Escaped, and that's where I first fell in love with him. And then I went backwards and saw The Diary of a Country Priest and La Dame de Bois de Boulogne and L'Ange du Pêche. And then after A Man Escaped, every film that came out, I was like ran to it. They aren't all equally good. There was a little bit of a low period in the early 60s, but he came back like gangbusters with The Devil Probably and his final masterpiece in 1983, L'Argent, which I think is an extraordinary film. And I can still watch them over and over again. And but I do I agree with Dumont. I mean, when I did see A Man Escape, there was a strangeness to it that drew me in. It's like, what is this director trying to do? Why is it so different? Why is it? It was fascinating to me to see someone working working in that way, in that style. I mean, it also helped me to appreciate the films of Ozu because I think that they are so similar in many ways. The restraint that Ozu uses is very similar, I think, to Bresson.
For me, that strangeness, because I just also remembered, I think one of the first films I saw was A Gentle Woman. And I cannot tell you, I all I remember is it starts with the suicide of this woman. I can't remember anything else about the film right now, but I feel like it's this feeling you get when you're trying to remember a dream is the same feeling you get often trying to recall, a Bresson film, other than A Man Escape, because, that has a pretty obvious ending, but just there's something about how he tells the story and the structure of it that is more dreamlike than.
Right. Well, A Gentle Woman opens with that great shot of the scarf floating down from the top of the apartment building to the sidewalk, which represents her suicide, which is unforgettable. Joan, do you remember?
I'm trying to think. There was a period of watching all of these filmmakers when I was not living with my children, and I had seen some of these films earlier on, but this was probably in the 70s. And I was living in La Jolla, and there was an art house, and they showed all of these films every Friday night, and I was the first one in attendance every Friday night. And I like Mara, feel all of these take me into a dream state. There's logic, but there's no logic. There's nothing. And I love that. I love the fact of being drawn into something that I couldn't readily explain sometimes. Mm-hmm. So, right. And also it was a state of mind. When we see these films, it's where you are in your life in time and space. So it's sort of associated with all of that.
Yes. Right. So, Jason, how are you?
I feel really good. What a conversation! I mean, we started by talking about cinema, and all of a sudden we're talking about free will and destiny and faith, and it's amazing how this film provides a window into all kinds of deep thinking. And we didn't touch even that much upon the historical context, which are fascinating too. So all beautiful. I really appreciate you guys bringing us into this film. Bresson is such a I want to talk about poetry too. He's
Yeah.
Maybe the Hemingway of he's not that macho, but he's got that kind of spare, no additional syllable necessary. Anyway, it's really beautiful to hear you guys talk about it and to remember the time I saw these films.
Could I just throw out a little cinema trivia fact that people might find interesting? First of all, I do feel like A Man Escaped is magnificently photographed, and Léonce Henri Burel's career goes back to the silent days. And he first worked with Abel Gance. His first film was in 1917 with Abel Gance, and then he went on to do Gance's Napoleon and J'accuse and La Rue. All of Gance's great films in the silent era were done by Burel. So the connection between Bresson in the 50s and Gance in the 20s is really quite extraordinary. The amazing talent that Burel brought to both Gance's films and to Bresson's films. And you look at, one of the most wonderful things about it is that it's like a masterclass in film lighting. It's just gloriously lit, every single frame, even though it's a kind of minimal style. But it's really quite extraordinary and quite a tribute to Mr. Burel.
So we've proposed the great De Sica film Umberto D to happen after Christmas. We're going to try to get that together for you guys if everyone's still up for it. What a treat! I mean, it's so great to revisit these movies with you guys. I really appreciate you being here.
Our pleasure. My pleasure.
Do you guys want to go out with another clip or try? I mean, we're having a little technical difficulty from the engineering room, but
yeah.
Okay, good. We can end with the end of the film, which is so stirring. I want to say a giant thank you to Paul, Tamara, to Joan for all that you do in the world of cinema. You guys, there's these wonderful films that you guys create and bring to our attention, and I think we'd be swamped with mediocrity if it was not for all of your efforts. And thank you for doing all that you do, and thanks for being the Council of Lost Classics here at the CCA. So we'll go out with the film. If you guys want to know what's happening next in the living room, go to ccasantafe.org. We'll post information about the next Lost Classics Roundtable shortly. And everyone, please be safe and wear your masks. And we will catch you very soon. And here we're going to go out with the very end, knock on wood, if we don't get glitchy, of Robert Bresson's A Man Escaped.
Juste. Si ma mère me voyait.
Terrific.
All righty.
Oh,
Adios, everybody.
nice to see you.
See you again.